So in this lesson, we're going to be taking a look at the selection tools. Now, the selection tools are these two very first tools over here in the tools panel, both of these arrows. The first one is your regular selection tool, and the one just below it is called the direct selection tool. Anytime that you click on something or click and drag around something, you will either be doing it with the selection tool or the direct selection tool, unless you are trying to make other types of selections, which we'll get into in a little bit. In order to actually demonstrate how these selection tools work, well, we need something to select. So let's first go to our window menu, artboards, and I'm just going to get rid of these 5 artboards here, artboards 2 through 6. So I'll click and select artboard 2, hold down the shift key, and then click on artboard 6. And that's going to select everything in between here. And now I'll click on the little trash can icon to delete all of those artboards, select the one remaining artboard, and press Command, Control, and 0 on the keyboard to fit it to my screen. Now I'll go ahead and X out of the artboards panel. Now, in order to demonstrate these tools, like I said, we need something to select. So I'm just going to come over here to the basic rectangle tool. Now, we'll be getting more into the shape tools in subsequent lessons, but for now, this is just to help us demonstrate how the selection tools work. And one of the nice things about Illustrator is that, at least in this version and maybe a few of the previous ones, anytime you hover over a tool, it's going to tell you the name of the tool, the keyboard shortcut, and it'll play a little video or animation that you see here to demonstrate how that tool works. So once I've selected that tool, you'll notice that my cursor has changed into this little crosshair. And now if I click and drag, I can create a shape. So with this tool, I can create a wide and short rectangle. I can create a tall and narrow rectangle, pretty much any type of 4-sided shape that I want to create here. But if I hold down the shift key and drag, I actually will go ahead and create a perfect square every time. So holding the shift key basically just constrains the proportions of your shape. And if you're not holding the shift key, it will just be more of like a free form, freestyle kind of rectangle here instead. Okay. And that works with pretty much all of the shape tools. Like if you have a circle, for example, which I'll just select to show you really quick, or an ellipse, if I don't hold anything down, you can see that I can have a little bit more control over the width or the type and the size of the circle. But if I hold the shift key down, again, it's a perfect circle. So now that we have our square here in the center of the canvas, I'm going to select my regular selection tool. And this is essentially the tool that you will use to select and move any kind of shape or object around in the workspace or on the artboard. And you'll notice that there's a couple of other things happening here. There's these little handles on the sides, as well as on the top and the bottom. And when I hover my cursor over them, you'll see how it changes. So if I move my cursor over this, I can click and drag to extend it down. I can extend the square up. I can extend it to the right, or I can extend it to the left. Of course, doing so means that it's no longer a perfect square, but you have that ability to modify these handles. Another thing that you can do here with these handles is to drag it out from the corner. And again, if I hold the shift key, it will just make the square larger as I drag out in that direction. And I can also do this to scale shapes down. So holding the shift key and dragging out from the corners is just a quick and easy way to scale a shape. And lastly, we are just going to look at this option here, which allows us to rotate the shape. So as I begin to rotate this, you can see that it's telling me the angle at which my shape is rotating. And of course, now if I hold the shift key, it's going to go at increments of about 45 degrees. Now, another thing that you might notice are these little tiny dots or circles on the inside of the box. And if I zoom in here, pressing Command, Control, and plus on the keyboard, I can get a closer look at this corner. Now, if I click and drag over this corner, you'll see that it starts to round the corners of my square. Now, the interesting thing about this is that if I hover my cursor over one of these 4 dots and I begin to drag inwards, you'll see that it's rounding all 4 corners of the box. And if I continue to drag this in, it'll basically just turn it into a circle. But if I instead just select the dot first before dragging it in, it will only round that one corner. So this actually gives you quite a bit of freedom and flexibility with how you could modify a shape like this. So for example, if I select the dot in the lower left, you'll see that it's now filled in, and I'm going to drag it in to round that corner. And then I'll do the same in the opposite corner in the upper right by selecting it and then clicking and dragging inwards to round it. And it creates this almost sort of leaf shape where I could now hold the shift key and rotate it a little bit. And you could almost imagine how you could turn this into a leaf, right? Just with a line down the center and maybe some other lines coming up at an angle. And what's funny is when you rotate a shape like this, you can kind of see how you may need to modify this a little bit more to get it perfectly symmetrical. But just for eyeballing it, you can actually see where these circles are in relation to the center point, which gives you a pretty good gauge for how you could make a shape like this more even. Now, I'm just going to undo this a few times, again, by pressing Command, Control, and Z on the keyboard, just to go back to our main square here. And now I'm going to switch to the Direct Selection tool. So this tool is a little bit different than our regular selection tool because yes, you can select a shape and drag it around just like the regular selection tool, but this one gives you more precision because now I can select individual corners or anchor points on this shape and I can click and drag those around, right? Your regular selection tool actually doesn't let you do that. If I try to do that here, it's just going to resize the shape like we looked at before. So I would switch to my direct selection tool by pressing the letter A on the keyboard, select my shape, click on one of the four corners, and now I can just manipulate that one corner and that anchor point. This gives you a lot of control, again, over how you can modify a shape like this to get even more custom and unique looking results. Just by dragging a few of these handles around, you can create some pretty interesting shapes, and this becomes even more useful when you're creating more complex and detailed vector illustrations or logos. This also works really well with type. So that is the sort of biggest difference here between the direct selection tool and the regular selection tool. So I want you to just try creating a basic square or a circle and play around with these tools a little bit, right? Try to rotate them, round the corners, round individual corners, and then also go ahead and try to manipulate some of these anchor points and see what kind of combinations and shapes you can create.